It, hello? Oh, it does work. Ha! Okay. Welcome to the editors panel. For anyone who doesn't know, we have 5 illustrious editors here with us today. Talk a little bit about themselves, talk a little bit about their journals, and answer any questions that you have. We'd like to have a lot of emphasis on the questions that you have. So if you don't have any questions, I, of course, have many, many questions, and I'll just ask them all. We have on the end there Hervé Stolovi, and next we have Bharat Sarath, and next is Joe Weber, and then Haresh Sakra, and right beside me here we have Arathelia Mora. So Hervé, do you want to start?
Thank you very much, Grace. Good afternoon, everyone. So Grace asked us to introduce ourselves briefly and to make a short presentation about the journal. So this is what I will try to do in the next few minutes. So I'm a professor of accounting in France at HEC Paris. And my main areas of research are accounting fraud, whistleblowers, and more recently, CSR reporting and non-financial information. So the journal, I'm the editor. I've been the editor of European Accounting Review for 3.5 years. So Grace asked us to explain the nomination, the appointment process, and then to give some practical information about the journal. So the appointment process, it's an appointment by the management committee, so it's a 4-year term, non-renewable, so I will end my term at the end of this year. And my successor has been appointed recently. She's Beatriz Garcia Osma from University Carlos III in Madrid. So she will begin her term on January 1st, next January 1st. Well, the selection process, there's a call for nomination, candidacies, then a selection by the publications committee, and then selection by the management committee. So concerning the journal, European Accounting Review, one element is, first of all, is that we welcome and we want to have submissions from any field, any topic, any type of methodologies. So this is what we want, and to show that the editor is in charge of creating a team. So I created a team of 22 associate editors, and I did my best to reflect this idea in the team, so to show with these associate editors that we really want diversity. So diversity meaning financial accounting, management control, qualitative papers, quantitative papers, historical papers, any type of papers related to accounting. The number of submissions, we have approximately 400 submissions per year for first submissions. If we had resubmission this year, we had more than, in total, 500, so plus 100 resubmissions. Some statistics about the management, editorial turnaround. So we have detailed statistics for the first round. So for the first round, the number of days from submission to the first editorial decision, excluding desk rejection, the median is 63 days. 63 days. So and it's very stable. So I'm happy because the team of associate editors is working very well, and that's thanks to the editors, to the reviewers too. And last thing I wanted to say is about acceptance. Okay, so it's always very hard to give an acceptance rate for a given paper, because the only right way to do it is to have a cohort of papers and to follow a cohort of papers over several years. But what I can say is we have approximately, in the first round, we have about 35% of desk rejection and 35% of rejection. Okay, so in total it's 70%. So it's very selective round. So now if we have to guess real acceptance rate, I think it's lower than 10%. Something I forgot to mention, which is practical, is we have in principle we have 2 reviewers. Okay, so with a few one, but for the first round for sure we have always, and that's the rule, we have 2 reviewers. Okay, so I will stop here. I don't want to talk too much. And should I hand the mic to my neighbor? Okay, well, thank you.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me a chance to speak here on this panel. My name is Bharat Sarath. I'm the editor of the Journal of Accounting, Auditing, and Finance. And I'm afraid I don't have the statistics like Hervé. I mean, he's reporting to his shareholders, so I guess he has to be more detailed. I'll just give you a very quick outline and one small piece on how the journal is changing. We get about 200 to 250 submissions a year, and we publish about 30. So that's roughly the ratio, about 1 in 8. I have not used desk rejections very much, but I probably have to do some, increase the percentage, simply because, people would like a quick turnaround. If it's not really high probability, I think you're better off trying somewhere else. So I think it's should never be discouraged when you get a desk rejection. It doesn't mean that your paper was, not worth refereeing. I've heard some people get quite hurt by desk rejections. That's really not the reason. It really works to the advantage of both the author and the journal. So you shouldn't get too discouraged by that. I just wanted to have one piece of philosophy that we're trying to follow at the journal while I'm editor. And that is to do with the way the stories are developed. You're trying to concentrate more on some kind of logical development and a little bit less on simple citations to try and build a story, a systematic story from the start. And the point is that if the world is completely efficient in the sense of the old market efficiency, it's very hard to find any interesting results for accounting. So we need some frictions in the market to make accounting of some use from a research dimension. The question really is whether these frictions are systematic or unsystematic. Let me give you a quick example. Markets don't clear completely. We know that. The New York Stock Exchange, the market never clears. There's always a surplus of either sells or buys, right? That kind of unsystematic friction should be compared with other kinds of systematic frictions. And I would say, very simply conclude with this, that at JAF, I'm trying to sort of push more unsystematic frictions, things like the market not clearing perfectly, and to try and see if your tests, empirical tests, can be geared towards these kinds of frictions rather than just using something which is systematic but may not be justified. So that's really the change in philosophy we're trying, and otherwise, I would encourage you all to try JAP as an outlet. Thank you very much. I'll pass it on to Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Weber. I'm a professor at MIT. I am a representative of the Accounting Review here. I'd also like to thank the conference organizers for inviting me out to have the opportunity to talk to you all. So as I said, I'm an associate editor. Mary Barth's the senior editor at the Accounting Review. I am also on the editorial boards of the Journal of Accounting Research, the Journal of Accounting and Economics, Contemporary Accounting Research, and I think I'm still on the Government and Non-for-Profit Journal, but they might have kicked me off for being on too many boards. Some statistics, I am not real great. I think if you really want a detailed analysis of the acceptance rates, Mary Barth goes through it at the AAA meetings, and you can see the presentation. They'll put it online. But I believe roughly the Accounting Review has about 1,500 or 1,600 manuscripts submitted, and the acceptance rates are somewhere between, I'm guessing, 80 and 90%, roughly 85%. In terms of the rejection rate. Sorry. Yeah, who knew how easy it was to get papers published there? Thank you. I appreciate that. By the way, when I say something stupid, I turn really red, so if I'm really red right now, I apologize. In terms of the structure of the journal, Mary's the senior editor, and it goes through a process of getting elected to the senior editorship, and then she selects a group of associate editors. The associate editors have decision rights, but Mary's the ultimate arbitrator. So the associate editors pick the reviewers and come to a decision, a recommendation, which then Mary can choose to accept or not. As an associate editor, a few things that you should know about the journal. So the journal does use 2 reviewers. The associate editor does pick out the reviewers. You can request an associate editor. I was unaware of that before I became an associate editor. And generally speaking, I think Mary does try to honor the requests and try to give papers to the associate editors that you ask for. In terms of desk rejections, I think the one comment that I would make on that topic is the overarching mantra for the Accounting Review is that it's an accounting journal, and so the first thing that I do when I read a paper is to say, is this an accounting paper or not? And that is somewhat subjective, but I think you should be aware that the thing that will lead to a desk rejection the quickest is if I can't easily identify whether or not the paper is going to be of importance to an accounting audience. I think that's all I'll add right now. I'll give it to Haresh.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and again, I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity. My name is Haresh Sapra. I'm a professor of accounting at the University of Chicago, and one of the co-editors of the Journal of Accounting Research. There have been some changes to the editorial structure, so perhaps I should talk about that at JAR. We now have 4 Chicago editors, so 3 of my colleagues at Chicago, and we now have 3 external editors who are not affiliated with the University of Chicago. And we also have recently created a body of associate editors, so sort of moving to a format similar to the Journal of Finance. The reason for that is just the exponential increase in the number of submissions for JAR in the last 4 or 5 years. So we receive about probably an average, I would say, 600 submissions a year. And in terms of handling the submissions per editor, before 4 of us was next to impossible. I handle mostly the analytical papers at JAR, but I was also handling other methodologies. So we decided to expand the editorial structure, and we have associate editors who essentially handle papers from different methodologies. So we accept all methodologies at JAR, from even survey-based research to analytical research, and anything in between. The journal is open to accepting papers that essentially have direct or indirect insights for accounting. And again, as Joe mentioned, it's difficult to draw the line, but I would say essentially we've accepted papers that essentially we feel, if not right away, but eventually will shed light on accounting issues. So I encourage all of you to submit your papers, not, as you feel the paper is well executed, it's an interesting question, you should send us your paper. In terms of some stats, I would say the acceptance rate, this is, I would say, probably for the last 5 years, it's about 8 to 10% at JAR. We do have a desk rejection policy also. We reject probably about 12%. Again, you should not be discouraged by that, the desk rejection. There might be various reasons. But you probably should think very carefully before you submit your paper that it's a good fit for the journal, it has insights for accounting. I think I'll stop here and take questions later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Araceli Mora from the University of Valencia in Spain and the editor of Accounting Europe. All the procedures in Accounting Europe is like in the European Accounting Review. Both journals are journals of the European Accounting Association. I've been the editor since 2018. I will be the editor to 2021. We have 4 associated editors. The way we proceed is that the editor selects the associated editors. Now we have 4 associated editors who manage the articles that are allocated in them. And we have more than 60 board members, mostly from European universities, but also from many other universities around the world. And the scope of the journal is, the scope is policy-relevant research. Policy-relevant research in a wide sense, so not just financial and non-financial reporting, also auditing and market regulation. And we try to have this connection with the regulators and standard setters and the profession. In fact, we have some members of the board which belongs to the ISB, IFRAC, or some other institutions, will help us to have this connection with the society, in a way, with the regulators. And we receive papers. People know that the scope of the journal very well, so we don't have many rejections because of the scope of the journal. People know the journal. They send the articles knowing which is the scope of the journal, so we have very few desk rejections in that sense. We are very interested not just in the European-based works, of course. We are receiving also works from the States, from Australia. We are interested in any work related with policy-relevant research that can have an interest for the European, which means many, many aspects at an international level. And our rejection rate, or acceptance rate, which sounds better, is 40%. And we are becoming, I think, the reference journal in policy-relevant research. So we are very proud of that. We are receiving papers with very high quality, and all the papers related with policy-relevant research from all over the world are very welcome. So thank you.
Thank you, editors. Anybody in the audience want to start off with a question? We have a roving microphone to help you be heard. Back here.
It's just a quick question. Where do you see tax research fitting into your journals?
She wants to know, where does tax research fit into your journals?
Okay, I guess I'll take that one first. So I think tax research is extremely important. So definitely we invite papers in tax, as long as these papers essentially have some kind of policy implication. So a paper that adds to the literature. I believe tax research is extremely important simply because not much in my mind is known about the impact of taxes on policy, and taxes have externalities. So any question that sheds light on externalities in my mind are very important for accounting and for the discipline.
I agree. Clearly, the accounting review is very accepting of tax research, and there are associate editors that specialize in that, and I don't even know that it has to be strictly of a policy nature, given the general audience of the accounting review.
Thank you. Yeah, so I can echo 2 times. I think tax research is quite important, but I think generally governmental accounting research as a whole is also a very underrepresented field. The issue with governmental accounting is that people tend to take things from financial accounting and then just apply to governmental. I don't think that that's a very good idea. But anything to do with tax or governmental, I think there is definitely a shortage of research in those areas. And I'll up the ante and say, I'll never just reject a paper on tax.
For EAR, tax research is also very important. When I began my term, I made a change. Tax research was implicitly covered by one associate editor. So what I did is I appointed, among the 22 associate editors, I appointed one associate editor who was explicitly devoted to tax research. So you probably know him. His name is Martin Jakob from WHU, Germany. So he does that, and he's busy with tax papers throughout the year. So we have a very good flow of submissions.
Another question from the audience?
Hello, Lisa Evans, University of Stirling and Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland. For most of you, the rejection rate seemed to be almost representing a quality kite mark. Is that a good thing?
So I think your question, that out of the first sentence, the only thing I really got was Scotland, but I went, yeah, Scotland. I think your question is...
Shall I repeat the question or rephrase it? A lot of emphasis has been placed on the rejection rates by the speakers, by each of the speakers. I'd like to just maybe challenge that or question that. Is a high rejection rate a kite mark or a signal of a high quality journal?
So the question is about whether there's a direct relationship between quality of the research in the journal and the rejection rate from the journal.
Well, as I said, I started saying the acceptance rate is 40%, because I think it's much better to talk about the acceptance rate than the rejection rate. But anyway, I think there are many variables. I don't think really we have many problems in accounting in general. We have many people working, and very few journals consider relevant in the way we measure now relevance. So having 600 submissions for a journal which is publishing 4 numbers per year is like necessarily you have to have a high rejection rate. There's no other way of working. But I don't think really there is a correlation, and we don't have to be proud of our rejection rate, I agree.
So I don't know what is the optimal rejection rate, if that's what you're asking. It's an interesting question in itself. This is rejection rate, not desk rejection, right? So I think we have, so I'm speaking from perspective of JAR here, I think we do have limited space in the journal, so we could expand the journal size, I suppose. That's one way of reducing the rejection rate. Not clear that's the right way to go. Essentially, we should be looking at, I think in my mind, other factors besides the rejection rate. I think taken together, I think this is the way to look at the quality of the journal and how it helps the profession. All I have to say at this point is I think at JAR we strive to not reject a paper because it's based on a different methodology or a methodology that is not traditional. We actually invite non-traditional approaches. In fact, I think that's the direction we should be going in accounting. For example, in my mind, I really like field experiments, field studies. We should be doing a lot more of that in accounting. I think if we keep sticking to the traditional approaches, perhaps that's why, papers sometimes get rejected, and I think we need to start becoming more creative. So I'm saying one way of alleviating that is, I think we need to innovate. Anyway, I'll stop here and give it to Joe.
So I think the reason we reported these statistics to you is because Grace said, hey, why don't you start off by giving us a sense of your journal, as opposed to us being particularly focused on what our acceptance or rejection rate is. But I think the broader question or the broader issue, in my experience over the last, I've been at MIT for 19 years, the number of papers that are being submitted to journals is growing exponentially across all of our journals. And as a reviewer, you see the amount of research, the demands. Many schools have increased their tenure standards. Many schools in Asia now have very active accounting departments that are now producing research. And so you, as an editor, I have become much more aware of how much research is being produced, which is, with limited journal space, is going to lead to it just mechanically an increase in rejection rates. And so I think we were just trying to give you a sense of what the rate is as opposed to say, ooh, we have the highest or the lowest rejection rate. So I think that's just an artifact of what's going on in the profession right now.
I'd like to expand on what Joe said. My main reason is that nobody should get discouraged when they get a rejection. I mean, some of it is just mechanical. In my case, I'm limited to 645 pages a year, which comes to about 30 papers. And that's just a hard limit. I can't do anything about it. The number of papers has increased, the quality of research has generally increased, and the amount of discrepancy between papers, I could publish twice as many papers without lowering the standard, that's what I feel. Or publish half as many, it's just become so much pressure on people to write papers and to submit them, that the difference between papers that are accepted and papers that are rejected is, especially at those that are close, it's very difficult to tell the difference.
The rejection rate is not decided upfront. The rejection rate is an outcome. So I think, and I agree with everything what has been said about the increase in submissions. I think that the most important is to see why are papers rejected. Why are they rejected at the first round? There are some explanations. And why are they rejected as subsequent rounds? There are other type of explanations. And I think this, the hardest, of course, for the authors is to be rejected as a subsequent round. But for the editors, as an editor, I'm disappointed when I see a rejection at a second or even third round. And there are some reasons. And most of the time it's because the authors, didn't understand or didn't do what the reviewers wanted. So I think a very big question is to understand the cause of rejection and to work on the cause of rejections.
Yes, it was me who asked them about rejection rates, because I know that sometimes authors actually look at rejection rates for various journals to decide sort of a subjective notion of what their prospect at that journal is likely to be. What do you think it is that determines the quality of a journal, and particularly from the point of view of a school's tenure and promotion process? What kinds of quality indicators do you think tenure and promotion committees look at?
Well, I think that's quite different in different countries. And we are now going to a point in which, at least in the last years, in many countries, the metrics have been the only thing. For example, in order to be promoted, publishing in a journal, being in Q1 seems to be relevant. It doesn't matter if it's Q1 in one field or another, which has been something that has been not so good for accounting sometimes, because we have many people doing research and sending their research to journals which have nothing to do with accounting and finance, so we are losing the impact in that sense. So I think we have to change and to consider, as in many countries are also doing, some other factors to measure which is the impact of a journal, not just being in these metrics, Q1 or whatever. So in that sense, I think it's quite different in different countries. But we, in accounting, there are things we can do, the editors, the academia in general, to consider some variables to measure the quality of our journals, and I think we have to work in that line.
So what was the question? So, no, all right, thanks. So I think, let me first talk about promotion decisions and tenure decisions at various schools driving different types of research. So I can speak from the perspective of Chicago. I think it is important that, to encourage high quality research, we can't be counting numbers of publications for promotion. It's an easy metric, right? You count more than X, you get promoted. But I think, there needs to be a concerted effort to reward creativity in accounting. because at the end of the day, you're remembered by your best papers, right? But not by the number of papers you've written. So there needs to be a concerted effort by schools, if you guys are leaders at your school, in the dean's office, I think it's very, very important to have this conversation and say, look, we need to move away from, accounting research is very difficult, right? We know that because it's filled with institutions, and accounting information comes in so many different forms. So to encourage, creativity and innovation, we need essentially to ensure that different schools provide the platform for that. In terms of the journal itself, we highly, highly encourage creativity in research, right? This is what gets our attention. You send a paper that's out of the box. That doesn't mean it get accepted, but like, hey, there's something new here. There's something different here. Also encouraging various types of methodologies in accounting, which again, I'm a big believer in that you have to look at a problem from different angles to really start understanding that problem. So that's where different methodologies come into play. Anyway, thank you.
So this question's particularly relevant given that we're a bunch of accountants and we spend our time teaching people how to measure performance, and now we're talking about how do we measure the quality of a journal. From my perspective, this question's most important to the people in the room that aren't tenured. Once you're tenured, whether you publish a paper in journal X, Y, or Z, I don't think you worry so much about the quality of the journal. You want your work to be out there and to have an impact. But quality does matter in the promotion process. And I write about 30 tenure letters a year, and I've seen many, many different ways that schools measure the quality of journals. So the piece of advice I would give you is find out what the standards are at your university. There's so much heterogeneity and there are schools that have an explicit list of here are the top A journals, here are B journals, here are C journals, here's what you need to publish your papers in. There are other schools that, like MIT has virtually no list. They're more interested in how many times your paper has been cited. So it doesn't matter where your paper's been published, but who it is that's citing the research that you're writing. And so I think in terms of trying to think about quality, the question I would encourage you to ask is instead, what does my school consider to be quality? And then think about what that means in terms of where you send your research.
Well, I fully agree with what Joe said a few seconds ago concerning heterogeneity. So it's very difficult to give a global answer about the link between tenure and publication, because there are so many different ways with the journal ranking list, with citation. I think that maybe I could say two elements. The first, I fully agree with beyond the level of the journal, the quality of the paper is very important. At this very moment, I was working on the tenure process of one of my colleagues in my school, and I was reading, in the tenure committee, I was reading the letters sent by the external referees, and I was amazed by the time they spent on writing what they think about the content of the articles published by this colleague. So I was really glad, because I would have been disappointed to receive a letter with one paragraph saying he published this number of A's, numbers B's, etc. is good or bad. Okay. So I think the topic, and also the reviewers pointed to the originality of the research. So I was also very happy to see this. Another element is even if the tenure rules specify A publications, I think it's important to have a portfolio. Not all papers can go to A publications, so I think that it would be wise to, of course, to target A publications, but also to have in mind some B publications, and not to hesitate if a paper doesn't get into an A journal, to keep the paper, not to kill the paper, but to publish it in a B publication, because some B publications are excellent, the content is good, and for the future, I think it's good to have a portfolio.
I wanted to go last because I'm a bit of a cynic on this. I think research quality is not measurable, and people are wasting a lot of time trying to provide objective measures of something that's essentially qualitative. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I'm Nazim Hussain, and I'm in University of Groningen. Well, you all know the objectives of these journals, and the major objective which I see is to provide important insight in the field of accounting. But due to this high rejection rate, most of the people are afraid to submit some good research in the accounting journals, and they go to some other disciplines like management or business journals. Don't you think it's a vestige of that important insight which can be provided to the accounting researchers? Because then again, we look into the accounting journals for the important insight. And if there is a very high rejection rate and people are afraid of submitting to these important journals, we lose that knowledge which we can use later for our own disciplines development. And if yes, what can you do for that? Maybe increasing the space or what?
So if I can rephrase your question, I think your question is, given these high rejection rates, too many accounting scholars are afraid to submit their papers to impactful journals in accounting, and instead they submit their papers to finance journals or management journals, and then those insights are lost to the audience who reads accounting journals.
Yes.
Do these authors feel like that happens? And if they do, what can we do about it?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's happening in more countries than in other countries, mainly related with what I said before. If metrics is the way of promoting people and getting finance, people realizes that it's easier to publish in relevant journals in other fields than in accounting. So we are losing part of our researchers and research, because at the end, publishing in those journals could be a very good thing, but sometimes if the objective is to publish in that journals because it's easier to publish there, then we are losing the impact of our accounting field, and that's not good. What can we do? I have no idea, because we have having this problem for many years, and I don't really know what to do, because having more journals doesn't seem to be the solution, and having more papers in each number doesn't seem to be the solution. So I don't know. Part of this must be our fault, but I don't know how to solve it.
So I think, yeah, it's a pity if you're writing a paper that could have accounting insights and implication, but you can't publish it in an accounting journal. But that happens all the time, right? It's true also for other disciplines, by the way, that some journals, you try them, you feel it's a great fit for this journal given the audience, and the journal rejects your paper, then you end up being published in a journal that perhaps is not the best fit. But still, notwithstanding that, I think there are ways that you could, essentially advertise or get your paper known out there. There are other outlets, right? There's SSRN, there are other places. I always believe that if you write a very good paper, eventually it gets picked up on. It might take a while, we might get very old, but eventually. What can the journals do about that? I still encourage you, right? You still make the connection to accounting, present it as many places as you can, and keep fighting, keep sending it to those journals. I face that all the time. I get papers rejected, and it's easy to give up and say, no, that's it. But the fact that there's going to be limited space in the journals, that's not going to go away. But you can always post your papers online and share it with the world community and present it as many places as you can, and hope that your ideas and your insights get picked up. If not in that particular paper, eventually it would in another paper.
So first, this is my opinion and not the opinion of the accounting review. Building on Haresh's point, when I'm reviewing or editing a paper, I don't think I've ever actually read an accounting journal in the last 10 years. I go to SSRN or Google and I look what the relevant research is from an electronic source as opposed to going to a specific journal. And I would not be surprised in 20 years if journals, the role of journals changes dramatically. I mean, right now what the journal does is it has a quality element to it where people look at journals with a particular quality, but I think the younger researchers probably don't even have paper journals in their office and probably spend very little time looking at the electronic versions of the journals. So the research is out there, it's being disseminated electronically, so your research can be disseminated and people will appreciate what you're doing. And I'll be curious to see, I think Shiva's talk yesterday about the technological changes in our industry. I don't know what the role of journals are going to be 20 years from now because the way research is disseminated now has changed so dramatically over the last 20 years that I'm not sure what the role is going to be. But again, that's my opinion. Please don't email Mary and said Joe said the following, but that's my view on this.
Thank you. I think that's a very valid point. I would also make a very simple practical point that there is a lag in JAF. It's over a year between the time the paper is accepted and the time it actually appears in print. So there is that very big time lag that you have to think about, where you're looking. So I would really encourage electronic searching. And I just want to add something to what Joe said. I took over the editorship of JAF about 6 years ago. And the publishers wanted to know if we want to move to a Yelp type system where we post the papers online and people give them stars, and why don't we do our journals that way? I think it's too early to do that because tenure committees like to see hard print copies of papers. But I think that eventually we're going to end up there. That's my feeling.
Thank you. I think it's a difficult question. Your question describes the reality. So I have experienced what you say personally, and I know several colleagues who go to journals outside of our field, especially in business, international business, or strategy. Of course, if the topic of the research is suitable for these journals. So yes, I think that you have the right to raise the question. We could discuss maybe an hour about that. Maybe one way to answer is one criticism that we hear from colleagues who do that is that maybe from our field, reviewers are sometimes tough, or the tone is maybe hard, okay? Even though it's very hard to make general statements. So at least what as editor I try to do is every time I had the opportunity to speak about it, and every time we have editorial board meetings, every time I insisted on the fact that I really wanted to have reviews with a nice tone, okay? Even a rejection recommendation, but the tone must be nice and helpful, even a rejection recommendation. So after that, we have about 500, last year we had, I'm sorry for the stats, we had 474 reviewers acknowledged, okay? So I don't see all reports, but I see many, many of them. And what I hear from authors, even from rejected authors, is they are grateful to be rejected in a short period first, and at least to have something constructive and not nasty, not with a negative tone, not insulting.
Yes, I wanted to add something to what you said before. I'm completely sure that you are probably right. In 10 years, this will be different. Because in fact, it has many limitations and it will be different. And I think, for example, SSRN is a proof that you do research and research is there and everybody can have access to this research. And this will be good in a way, However, I was thinking about newspapers that are disappearing and now there are no filters. So the problem we can have with this situation is, on one side, everything will be there. We don't have to have these traumas of waiting for 10 years to have an article published. But on the other side, what happens with the filters? So it's something that we must think about.
I promise I won't ask about rejection rates. I wanted to ask about the audience. I mean, in the accounting profession, you basically have four main audiences. You've got the academe, you've got corporate accountants, you have accounting auditors, profession, and you have regulators. You have the regulatory bodies, et cetera. Now, when you look at a paper, and wanted to ask this kind of as a kind of a, when you look at a paper, do you look at those audiences as to whether or not you think that a particular paper will fulfill a need or some information at one of these audiences? And is it just strictly, primarily the academe that you're looking at, or is it do these other factors come in, and how important are they?
I think that's a very good question. So there are various constituencies for accounting scholarship, including academe, but also people who do accounting in the real world, like auditors, regulators, et cetera. To what extent in each of your journals do you think about the constituents other than academe? Or is the point of your journal mostly to inform other academics? Is that?
Well, in general, that's what we do. The academics try to inform other academics as a primary goal. However, for example, in Accounting Europe, we have been trying since many years ago to have this interaction with institutions. Having these institutions in the board has been the first step, and organizing, for example, a European Financial Reporting Advisory Group has an academic panel now, and we try, also Accounting Europe is very involved with that, we try to translate into plain language the articles in order to have an impact and in order to allow them to know what we are doing. So I think this is important if we want to have this impact in the society, which is not easy to measure, by the way. So the fact that these people do not understand the article doesn't mean that the article has not an impact. So we have to try to get this balance between the interaction with the society and being what we are, which is academics. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. So I don't know where we draw the line. I think both, speaking from the perspective of JAR, we want papers to advance the knowledge of prior work, build on that. I think that's useful to build a body of work. But I think it's extremely important that papers speak to policy, to regulators, to auditors, in my mind. So maybe this is more my own perspective or bias. I think every time I think of an idea, I struggle with that, but many times I would say, is this something that policymakers, or this is a debate that's been going on out there in the wider world. So I think it should be both. It should be advancing, but I think we should be striving to make connections with, with public policy, and it's a two-way street. I think also, I always meet regulators here and there. They say, "Oh, I don't know what you guys are working on. We don't see the value in your research many times." And I tell them, you have a research department. How many of your people in your research department have gone and looked at academic journals or papers and gone to SSRN? Right? So it's a two-way street. They also have to come and meet us, halfway or some way. And so I get the feeling, I think that more interactions, and I've been talking about this for many, many years now, but I think more interaction between the academic community and people in the policy circles is, I think, highly desirable. Hopefully we're getting there. I think there is, now a feeling that regulators are talking about cost and benefits of policy, and this is where we come in. So I think it's a huge opportunity for us as journals to encourage that from authors, and also as researchers to to make that connection.
So I'm going to answer this question from a different approach. So I've never asked a regulator or a practitioner to be a reviewer on a paper. So I've never sent a paper out and said, oh, Mr. Regulator, what do you think of this paper? Or Mr. Practitioner or Mrs. Practitioner, what do you think of this paper? I think that because the review process relies on academics, you tend to see the papers being written to try to get published to satisfy a reviewer. And so you're going to see a natural outcome of this process of publishing research to satisfy the academics first. That being said, and I think Haresh has said it much better than I will, you want to try to influence the people that make regulatory policy. And when I read a paper, I am looking to see if it has regulatory implications. To be honest, I was a practicing accountant. I spent 5 years working in audit, and I can say that as an auditor, I never read any of the journals that are sitting up here. I'm not sure that people that do practice accounting on a day-to-day basis consume our research, but I do think that part of the answer to your question is I know that at my university we have a press office that goes out and knocks on my door every time I write an article and says, how can we make this article be decipherable by people that are in practice? And so I think there are other ways that our research gets disseminated to practitioners, but as I said, given the nature of the way research gets published, I think you're going to find that the academics are going to be the primary audience.
Yeah, I guess I'm coming from left field too. I started off in mathematics, and when I moved to the social sciences, I always feel that they ported over a model from the hard sciences, which wasn't exactly appropriate for research in the social sciences. In social sciences, problems never get solved in the same sense that they do in science. And to talk about new research is somewhat misleading. And I think this has led to all kinds of distortions in the incentives for people to write and publish papers. How this will get solved, how this will get resolved, I really don't know. I have a lot of PhD students. They leave our program, they become junior faculty, and when I'm running my journal, my only thought is about them and their need to build an academic career. So that really distorts my incentives too.
I could add that for our journal, and the authors know it, but we pay a lot of attention to their contribution and to the contribution to regulation or to their managerial contribution. So even though it's not the first target of the paper, it's extremely important for authors to show this contribution. And when papers are reviewed, when papers are handled by editors, we all look carefully at this aspect of the papers.
I'm going to cheat just a little bit and add a comment of my own. We also wear this other set of hats, and in this other set of hats, we're in the classroom, and we're teaching the people who are going to be the regulators and the auditors and the practicing accountants. And so if the journal publishes papers that are oriented towards academics, but they're accessible enough that the academics can see the policy implications and the implications for the real world, then you should expect that to show up almost immediately in the classroom, and that's perhaps the best place to make it really relevant to those other constituencies. Just my 2 cents.
Hi, my question is a bit more going back to the fundamentals. I hear a lot about publishing, but can you hear me better now? So I hear a lot about publishing, how many numbers of papers for the academics to get the tenure. Shouldn't the academia be more concentrated on pushing the boundaries of actually getting published some research that is innovative? When is the last time we heard of Tesla producing a new academic paper? It seems that it's more concentration of just publishing in order to build an academic career, rather than building an academic career based on the experiments or new research, actual new research. Do you want me to rephrase?
I think that you're saying, shouldn't we be more focused on innovative research that pushes the frontiers of knowledge than we are on publishing papers so we can count them up and present them to the personnel committee?
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, in relation with innovation and being creative, we have been talking about that before, the word innovation and being creative in accounting research. I think that in fact we have been working in accounting research very focused on the traditional theories, the market, financial market theories, agency theory, the traditional methodology. And I think we can be creative and we can have innovation just looking at other fields, other theories, as political science, behavioral science, because accounting is a social science, and we have been very focused in what we have been focused in the last years. And in a very specific methodology, we has been very skeptical about using a qualitative methodology, except in management accounting, that they have used it, but in financial accounting, we have been very skeptical, probably because we are not trained properly to do this research also. But increasing our knowledge in other science, in other theories, political is a big issue now in accounting. This public interest matter that is all over the world nowadays is a political theory. So I think we have to be, we need innovation in these areas, which are not new, because there are many fields working in these theories, but I think accounting have to go further in that sense, and if being innovative means to consider other theories further than the ones we have been considering for many years, that's a good thing, and we can improve our knowledge and even have a greater impact in our society, in my view. Just doing that is not easy because we are very skeptical, even the editors, the reviewers, about these new theories because we are not familiar with them. So probably it will take time, but I think it's quite necessary to do that.
Yeah, so clearly research has to be creative and innovative. But again, I don't necessarily think, maybe you mentioned that or I misunderstood you. I don't think necessarily we should be writing, doing research for practitioners or for, people out there in the real world. I think, and research takes time, right? Something today that is a small problem that is cryptic eventually gets in the real world and takes time. I'm not saying necessarily we are working on that. I'm just saying that we need to be very careful in terms of where we draw the balance. But, to do creative, innovative research, I mentioned that earlier, I really believe we need to, be very interdisciplinary. I strongly believe in that. I'm a theorist, so I read a lot about work in economics and finance, new methodologies, and see, how can they be adapted to accounting issues. So I think being creative, using different methodologies, looking at a problem from different perspectives is really, really important. Just not being set to one type of methodology. But it's, being creative, innovative takes time. We need to reinvest in ourselves. We need to retrain ourselves many times, and we're seeing that now, right? There's a lot of data out there, right? There's a lot of data, and so there are a lot of interesting questions that arise from having data. We have audited data. As usually, information is audited. A lot of the information out there is not audited. So the interaction between these two types of data, how does that affect accounting? So many sources of information. So I think we really need, in that sense, to be creative and think about how we can address questions that we've been looking at before, but perhaps take a fresher look at those questions using different methodologies and data. Not sure I answered your question, but maybe I did or did not.
So, when I think of the question you asked, as I've been doing this for 20 years, and so I can think of the big problems that I've seen happen over the last 20 years and what accountants and how they've responded. So if we think about Arthur Andersen and then thinking about the auditor independence problem and the tremendous amount of research that got done on the auditor independence problem after Andersen went under, or the financial crisis, and in fact Haresh wrote a fantastic paper on thinking about the role of accounting in the financial crisis, or on Enron and thinking about the importance of governance systems. And so I think that if we think about the big problems that have faced the profession and the regulatory things that have come out after that, there's a large body of research that's out there that has tried to help inform the regulators on the properties of the accounting system or the auditing system or the system of corporate governance to try to help them think about how they can prevent those problems from happening in the future. So I'm actually, I'm generally a pessimist, but I'm mildly optimistic that I think we have influenced the world in a very positive way. And I think that we will continue to do that because I think, you know, yes, we try to get stuff published, but we also try to publish stuff that are going to help people change the world, in my view.
Yeah, I just want to go back and just make an observation that the average schoolboy today can solve problems that defeated the greatest mathematician of 500 years ago. But the average schoolboy today is no better merchant than a Venetian of 500 years ago or a philosopher of 3,000 years ago. The point is that we have social sciences problems don't get solved in the same way they do in sciences. And what we have to think about is new ways of thinking about the problem so that we can avoid difficulties that come up in the future. So, for example, the creation of the PCAOB was a reaction to try and keep the system on course. That's very different from saying that the problem of failure of accounting can be solved. I mean, it just cannot. So I think that this should really condition the way we think about the role of research, especially accounting research, in terms of how it influences institutions that can maybe provide a little better guidance, but not in terms of finding a solution to a great problem.
Of course, I cannot more than we should publish innovative and original research, okay? One practical difficulty, well, a paper can be innovative or original in different ways, but sometimes as an editor on a very, very practical basis, when a paper is so original, so innovative in terms of research methods, one difficulty is to find the reviewers who are able to judge and to evaluate the paper. So, of course, we should improve. I mean, the editors, the reviewers, we should work, we should improve, and we fund reviewers, but this requires a lot of work to be able to judge the paper in a fair way.
Well, so that brings us to one of the panel organizers' questions, which is, from your perspective, what kinds of new skills should we be developing, or should we be telling our PhD students to develop? What kinds of new skills will it take to be a good accounting scholar in the future?
Well, as you already said, it's a problem of being trained in order to be innovative. And we are not training our PhD students. We have not been trained for different things that the things we are doing, the traditional theories, the traditional methodologies, and it makes us to be uncomfortable with something that we are not familiar with. I think if we want to change in that sense, we have to train our scholars. We have to be trained before. We have to train our scholars in these theories and methodologies. If not, this is not going to happen. And for a while, we will be quite skeptical about this type of papers. So we need to train the scholars in a different, additional, what we are doing, but additionally in these new theories, not new for us, but theories and methodologies to do something different that we need to do.
I couldn't more than agree. I really think training at the PhD level, has gone down. That's my opinion again. I think 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you got a PhD in accounting, you got trained in theory, you got trained in not just economic theory, psychological theory, you had frameworks to think about problems. My opinion now is there's so much pressure to publish that as a PhD student, you have PhD students having 3 or 4 working papers or 2 or 3 publications, which is mind-boggling, right? Because you're supposed to be trained as a PhD student, get frameworks, because you build on that. Once you graduate, you become an assistant professor, you use these frameworks. Nowadays, I think, you are essentially driving at the age of 3, so to speak. You should be walking, falling down, taking baby steps, then riding a bike. I think that's going away. That worries me a lot. So PhD training is extremely important, right? In fact, you don't have frameworks, you can't think of problems. And I'm a theorist, so I'll say that even more forcefully, right? You need to take economic theory classes or learn theoretical models to form a basis for developing questions and building on that. And I worry about that because I think, we're too quick to start publishing or writing or thinking about research in our PhD programs. Anyway.
So building on Shiva's talk yesterday, I am already obsolete. I can't run my data anymore. I'm at the point where the statistical methods that we use are beyond what I learned as a PhD student. So I do think the methods have increased rapidly, and being familiar with new methods is really important. But I will give you one piece of advice that I got when I was a PhD student. So you take a field, you get your accounting education, and then you have some other subfield, whether it be psychology, sociology, economics. Importing from other fields into accounting provides tremendous amounts of opportunities. So if we think about all of the things that have changed in our field in like textual analysis or linguistics, or using, and people are looking at how your facial recognition, or we think about psychology or sociology. People are bringing all of this stuff from other fields into accounting, so getting some other specialization in a field beyond accounting and going to that literature, paying attention to that literature, and importing things from that literature into our field offers tremendous amounts of opportunity for research.
Yeah, I think this is a problem that I think every active PhD program faces every year, on how to strike the balance between learning topics that may not be immediately useful for writing a paper and balancing it with the need that people need 2 or 3 papers, working papers, before they even graduate from their PhD. So I don't really know, but I just feel that a little bit more history and a little bit more law would be useful in the program. We're okay on the statistics side. Everybody realizes it's very important. People learn to use Python now because text processing has become such a big thing. But some of the softer sides of things like law, I think if you have the time, if any of you are PhD students and you have some extra time, which is a real luxury in a PhD program, that might be something for you to think about.
Speaking about all these software, Python, textual analysis, linguistic analysis, I think that there could be a change for qualitative researchers, or I have seen a change for qualitative researchers. I think that qualitative researchers could benefit from these tools. So when there was a clear separation between qualitative research and quantitative research, I think that this border is a little bit disappearing year after year, because these tools can be very, very useful for qualitative researchers.
So thank you very much for a very interesting set of presentations. I hear a lot of comments about needing new insights, doctoral programs, and broadening more theory and so on in our education. But it's particularly noticeable if one looks at the panel as a whole, how it's dominated by a view of accounting as being a subfield of economics. Where is the political theory? Where is the sociological theory, the law, the history? The journals that do publish in those fields in accounting are absent here. And I just wonder what has happened that means that editors who are at this Congress, who represent those journals, who do represent innovative, new work, why they're absent from this discussion.
You want? Irene wants to answer this one?
No, I don't mind. No, I think you can be right in the sense that this could be innovation, but it doesn't mean that these journals do not accept innovation, and it doesn't mean that you are the owner of the innovation methodology. I mean, it's a question of what we are now. What we are is that most of our doctoral students, most of our researchers are not trained in this methodology. They are not trained in these theories. So we are representing what's going on now, which means that it doesn't mean that we are right. We all acknowledge that we need a change. It's true that some people are doing this for a while, for many years, but that's a minority. What we are saying now is that we are the majority, we are representing the majority, and we need to change in order to give, just to open to this type of theories and methodologies that we know they exist. That's why I said that's not innovation. More people are doing that, even in accounting and in many other fields. And we have to recognize now that we are the majority and we need a change in order to innovate. That's a recognition of what the majority, I think, are thinking about this topic.
We're just about out of time. Does somebody else?
So the last 4 papers that I published have been on governmental accounting and have imported from the political science field and trying to understand the role of financial reporting in governmental entities. So I think that we publish in a variety of different spaces, and I don't think that there's an innate bias of, oh, you have to have an economics-based background. I can't speak for all of the backgrounds, but I can say that in terms of political science and law, which are 2 of the things that we've talked about up here, I think those backgrounds are incredibly important to accountants, and I think that the journals recognize that both of those sub-disciplines add to our field tremendously. So I agree that all of us have an economics background, but I don't think we're limited to only doing research in an economics framework. I mean, but that's my opinion.
And I'll just add to that. I'm the economist here, I suppose. To me, it's the research question that's important, right? Not the discipline on which it's based. I think political science, we have a lot to learn. Accounting is all about, I think, different stakeholders having different information. So I strongly believe that political science, sociology, we have a lot to learn from that. It's the research question. It's the question that essentially is the most important thing. In my mind, not the methodology. And having different methodologies to shed light on a question is extremely useful for our profession.
That unfortunately puts us 1 minute past our time. So I would like, on behalf of the panel, to thank Irene and her colleagues at the University of Cyprus for marvelous hospitality and also for participating with the European Accounting Association to organize the symposium. And I'd also like to thank the panelists for their insights. Thank you.